Good evening, and thank you everybody for joining a special episode of the Lavigne Show, as we have quite the panel for you. If you've been paying attention to social media the last day or so, John Bolton and others, we have a collection of constitutional conversations for you. We're going to presume this is now October 20th, and we're starting the conversation about what comes next. Because if there is a successful referendum on October 19th, we need to start thinking about this. And what's better time to start than now? As part of the Alberta Women's Independence Network series, this is episode number 7. And what we're doing is going to present to you the conversation with Bruce Pardy. We got Matthew Rowley and Dennis Kalma, who's going to talk about different types of constitutions. And we'll just grab that comment. There we go. And first, we'll go ahead and bring in the Alberta's Women's Independence Network to talk a bit about this episode. We got Angela, Kathy, and Pat. Thanks for joining us all. Here we go. This is the big day, number 7. You guys have been crushing it for 6 solid episodes. So thank you very much for doing that. Let's go ahead and start with Angela. Angela, why are we here today?
Well, the Alberta Women's Independence Network is a group of ladies that we got together a little over a year ago. And our focus has been on reaching out to Albertan women. We also have men that join us as well, but reaching out to Albertan women and inviting them to join the conversation around Alberta independence. Our focus has been on education and building community through respectful dialogue. So as we've been going around the province holding meetings, and our focus is smaller meetings, in-home meetings, sometimes local cafes, restaurants, and sometimes town halls, more one-on-one, face-to-face conversations. We keep hearing the same questions about, well, what would this look like? What could it practically be if we were to become an independent country of Alberta? And it was the same questions over and over again. And so a couple months ago, we got together and started to discuss, like, how can we address these questions in a really meaningful way? And we came up with the idea of using a paper that Colonel David Redmond had put out in 2024, discussing 6 national interests that must be addressed and used in a successful country. Now, his paper was geared towards Canada, kind of a callback to what it used to be. But when we looked at that paper, we realized this is exactly the perfect framework for this discussion around an independent Alberta. And so we've been holding, as you said, a series of episodes where we've brought in different speakers to address these different national interests. Some of the speakers are from Alberta. Some of them have been from outside of Alberta. And we've also invited many of our Albertan podcasters, such as yourself, Jason, such as John Bolton and Corey Morgan, and a few others, to join us in this, to spread this message of this discussion that we're having.
Fantastic. That's a great introduction. And if you haven't caught any of those episodes, or even just a couple, go catch up after this one as well, because it all comes together, I think, quite well here. So, Kathy, great job. Why this episode and why these 3 people?
Because no matter where we go or who we're talking to, people want to know, what about our Constitution? What is this going to look like? What's going to govern us? And how can I say yes to something that I don't have an answer to yet? And so it's been really fun to watch people make that journey through the why. The why seems to be satisfied. Now it's, can we do this and how? As Angela said, what's it going to look like after? And so as we were sitting down, the 3 of us, and discussing, okay, well, who could we reach out to for podcasters? And we got that list down. And now who could we reach out to for subject matter experts? Well, these 3 gentlemen, I mean, their names just immediately rose to the top and came out. It just made perfect sense. And the fact that each of them come at this from a different angle helps us know that the conversation is going to be very well-rounded, that it's going to probably touch everybody's concerns, everybody's wants, everybody's needs. All the things that people are thinking about should be pretty close to addressed by bringing these 3 guys together. And thankfully, none of them said no. So here we are. And I've pen and paper ready, man. I'm ready to take notes. I'm ready to learn from them. And I'm really excited to be able to foster and facilitate this conversation so that Albertans can now take it home and continue to have it as we go through the summer and get together with family and friends. And maybe this could be just the fireside chat of the summer of 2026, as what is our Constitution going to look like?
Fantastic. I'm excited as well. I've spoken to all three gentlemen at different times. Now we have them all together. And there's going to be a lot of cooks in this kitchen, but I have a feeling it's going to be very civil. Pat, as we're going through this one, how important is it to you that the audience engages and asks questions and gets involved as we do that as the second half of this episode?
Very, very important. In fact, that's kind of the primary point of going live. And I think it fosters, because a lot of people think like, well, okay, who's going to be the boss of the new Alberta? And the whole point that we're trying to get across is that everyone needs to get involved because it's a democratic process. So the more people get involved and the more questions they ask and comments they make and criticisms they bring forth, the better we can build this new independent Alberta. So please jump in, and we look forward to hearing from your comments.
Fantastic. I think we're in great hands having the three of you putting these together, running around Alberta, having conversations, and I'm very excited to get this started. So we're going to bring you back at the end during the Q&A portion, and thank you very much for being here, ladies. Appreciate that a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, audience, make sure that you go and start putting your questions and comments in there, and don't be afraid to direct it to a particular panel member or the entire panel, or just a general question on what you think is going on, and then we'll take our best shot at it. Keep in mind, this isn't a debate. We're not trying to see who wins, and also understand that we can't set policy at this stage. These are just ideas and conversations at this stage. That's why we have so many of them. So don't think you're going to walk away from this understanding exactly where Alberta is going to be. It's multiple paths. And at some point in the future, then we'll have a conversation at probably the Constitutional Convention on exactly what we have. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring in Dennis Kalma, Bruce Pardy, and Matthew Rowley. Nice to see you all, gentlemen, as I bring you up here. Okay, hello. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the panel, quick introduction on each of you, and then kind of throw in what is your position on the spectrum of constitutional options. We'll start with Dennis.
So are you going to ask me questions, or you're going just to tell people what I think?
Well, first introduce yourself and then just give us your perspective on the spectrum. So where do you fit on the spectrum of the constitutional options?
So my name's Dennis Kalma. I'm the only one that probably doesn't have deep constitutional education. So I tend to come at the world primarily from a literally average citizen point of view. And that point of view, which I've grown to over time, based in part on learnings from Bruce Pardy and from Matthew, is that the legitimacy of the government flows exclusively from the people through an explicit written constitution, and that government only exists within constitutional boundaries. Rights are very specific, textual, and clearly understandable. Powers of government are enumerated specifically, and anything not stated explicitly is prohibited. And you can amend the Constitution, but it's somewhat difficult. So in simple terms, a constitutional Republican like myself seeks liberty with structure, democracy with limits, and state authority with explicit constraints. So that's the point of view I have.
Okay, fantastic. Bruce, same question to you. A little bit about yourself, and then where do you fit on the constitutional spectrum?
Thanks, Jason. I'm the Ontario interloper in this section. I'm a prof of at the law school at Queen's, and I run a small think tank called Rights Probe. And I've been talking about the new possible constitution for Alberta for quite a while now. I would put the spectrum this way. Dennis is the middleman. I'm probably the most radical, and Matthew is radical in his own way. He wants to take us back to something that we used to have, and sort of still have, but not exactly. So my take is that Alberta hopefully is going to have a moment where all things are possible. And one of the choices it will have, if it chooses to take it, is to design a free country. Now, I mean, an actually free country. And that depends upon its constitution. If it doesn't take that opportunity, then it will end up adopting something sports constitution that it is used to. And that is part of the problem. So I would characterize these three models this way, if I may. Matthew's model is a legislative supremacy model. The legislature can do anything, not restrained by the courts. Dennis's model is a checks and balances model. It tries to insert institutions to try and control each other in competition with each other, courts and legislatures and executive and so on. And my model is a freedom model. It's a flipped default model, and that means that essentially that everybody has ownership of their own lives, and that the state is not empowered, not legislatures, not courts, not executive branch. Nobody is empowered to provide for the general welfare, the public interest, the common good in a way that would require setting aside your freedom. So my model is the individual first.
All right, you pretty much laid that out there. Now, Matthew, how close is he on that one? The traditional, going back a little bit, go ahead and introduce yourself and give us your position on the spectrum of the constitutional options.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Matthew Rowley, president of Renew Alberta, and Bruce said it pretty well. I do think that there's something that we can go back to, that though Pierre Trudeau wrecked our system, and though there is opportunity to adjust in a new constitution and change a little bit here and there, tweak it, we started with something good, and it's much better to adjust what is good than to try to remake out of whole cloth something that may or may not work, and then we end up with an equal or an opposite problem. So the key elements that I value in our system are responsible government, parliamentary structure, separate roles for the head of state and the head of government, first past the post system of electoral method, and then a unified power between the executive and the legislative, and an independent judiciary and a nonpartisan public sector. These are kind of the foundations that make up our system. It's got a 1,000-year history to it of development and change that's led us to this. That means it can be flexible where it has to change, but also we have something that we can start with that has proven to be robust over many, many years. So that is what I advocate for. It would be probably the most conservative position from a Canadian or an Albertan point of view, but it's good to have this opportunity to talk it through.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matthew. So what I'm going to do for this first question is going to be the same question for all three of you gentlemen. It's going to be, and I'm going to go from the most familiar, which will be Matt, all the way to Bruce. So that'll be the order. Go Matt, Dennis, Bruce. What is you advocating for that is good? So give me one or two things that are good, and then one or two things that will be different. So for example, Matt, you say go back to before Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Can you remind the listeners what you mean by that? So what's a couple of things that are good about the system you're talking about, and how did it change or go bad with Pierre Elliott Trudeau?
Sounds good. Well, it provides us a system of responsible government where the legislature is supreme, but it's not an empty supremacy or an authoritarian supremacy. There still must be a responsibility to the people who elect the legislature, and it's not merely at the time of election, but during their government, they have the requirement to actually stay responsible to the people that they've been elected by. In addition to that, we have the reserve power of the Crown that allows for a kind of a final safety catch if things go bad. As far as the Canadian experience now, Pierre Trudeau basically destroyed our Westminster system by placing the Charter of Rights and Freedoms into his new constitution, which actually created a judicial supremacy where the Supreme Court has the right to overthrow law. The legislature can make a law and the Supreme Court can say, no, that's not constitutional, and overturn it. And we've seen them do that a lot. So a significant problem that I have with the present day system is the way that it's been changed to provide the courts with a sure way to destroy the will of the people if they so want, and to push especially progressive agendas.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Dennis, when we go to you, some Canadians are probably familiar with the constitutional republic. Can you lay out a couple items that would be a benefit, and then a couple things that you would change or tweak, if any, with what we're familiar with the U.S. system?
So the things that people will see that would be different under a constitutional republic is, first of all, that people are truly supreme. You'd see that in the areas of things like referenda, controlling what government can do, binding referenda. You'd see things like your rights explicitly defined and spelled out in a very textual fashion that cannot be, fiddled around with by a judge who happens to like something different. And you see very clear paths of what government can and cannot do. And those are the things that you really can restrict government right down to, for example, putting a cap on how much money they can spend. So locking them in financially. So a couple of things that I think we can add in compared to the US system, and the ones that are near and dear to my heart are things like term limits. I think the penalty for a bad politician is far larger than the penalty of losing a good one. So we see things like explicit term limits. You get your 8 years in office and that's it, you're done for your life. The other things we see is, again, the referendum, which I mentioned earlier, which is any citizen can make a referendum and actually make it stick on the government. Now, you need enough votes. You can't be just a minority doing this, but it has to move that way. And so if you push on those things, and tied with one last innovation, grown largely from the Westminster system, and that is the idea of an oversight branch. It is actually the last sober thought to make sure the rest of government is adhering to the terms of the Constitution. So that's an addition that we put in compared to the American system, and we think will help stop lockup that you see down there frequently.
Okay, fantastic. Well done. Okay, so Bruce, we're going to come to you, and this is going to be a little bit different because it's a new type of system. It's very radical. So
Sure.
Can you hit us with a couple of the items that you think are really important to understand, and then kind of lay out a couple of the items that you think people really should understand from a cautionary standpoint, like this won't be there or that won't be there. Maybe address two things that you think are good, and then a couple of things that people will have to wrap their head around that you think are important.
Well, one way to explain it is to contrast it with the models that Dennis and Matthew are talking about. Now, those two are also very different, but here's one thing they have in common. They're both talking about giving power to the people. But it's very important to understand that what this is and is not. They're talking about giving power to the people in the democratic sense. That is, yeah, you can vote. It does not mean giving power to the people individually. It does not mean that you are free. And by that, I mean this. If the people elect a government with the mandate to provide for the general welfare, and that government, with the support of the people, decide that it needs to override your freedom, then it will have the mandate to do that. So, for example, let's consider COVID. The COVID regime that a lot of us did not like was a product of legislatures and bureaucracies, executive branch. If you adopt Matthew's model, that's what you're going to be able to get. Legislatures are supreme. Therefore, they can do anything they want as long as they have the approval of the people. Now, my model works differently in this sense. One of the things that both Dennis's and Matthew's model does is start out with a default position. The premise is this: if you are elected as a legislature, or if you are a court, if you put all the parts of the state together, courts and legislatures and executives, the state can do anything. Its powers are unlimited. Its subject matter jurisdiction is unlimited. Now, Dennis's model, unlike Matthew's, sets out an exception. All powerful, except. And the exception in Dennis's model is, your list of rights. So the state can do anything except those things that a court decides when it's gone too far, like your freedom of speech. Okay. That also didn't work during COVID. A lot of us were enraged because the legislatures and bureaucracy has done a certain thing, and then the courts wouldn't fix it. They said it's fine. My model flips the default. It goes like this. The state, all of its bits, legislature, executive, courts, can do nothing. It has no powers accept. And now we'll talk about what we want the state to actually have the power to do. And I've been listing essentially three things. You want the state to, number one, keep the peace. You don't want riots in the streets. You don't want to be attacked by your neighbor. You want to be able to call the police. Number two, resolve disputes. If you and your neighbor are fighting over a fence, you want a place to go to, a neutral place like a court to resolve the dispute. And number three, protect the country. You want a military. You want borders. You want to make treaties. So 1, 2, and 3, keep the peace, resolve disputes, protect the country, and not very much else. And if you have that structure, that architecture, that means by definition you are free, because the state does not have the power or jurisdiction to do otherwise. It does not have the power to restrict your speech. It does not have the power to restrict your religion, and so on. So under my model, you do not actually have to try to list all of the rights that you think you ought to have, because they're already done. You've already done the most important bit, which is restrain the state. Now, there are a whole lot of details that need to be filled in, but I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, we'll end it right there. Fantastic. And I'm the one that restricts the speech around here today. So sorry about that. So the next one will go Dennis, Bruce, and Matt. We've seen overreach of all kinds of governments everywhere. What mechanisms would there be within yours, Dennis, that could help restrict, respond, or even hold to account out of control government?
So I know Bruce and I have our challenges about agreeing on this, but I think you can define the rights that are applicable in a fairly succinct fashion, like under 15 or so, blanketed together. So I think you can say basically, as long as I can speak, as long as I can move, as long as I can bear firearms, whatever, I'm good. And the control is that if government tried to impose COVID, you would basically cross over several of those enumerated rights. Plus, of course, you would have the option to go at the government via referendum. And in the Constitution draft we've been putting together, there is no mechanism for the government to overrule a referendum, to overrule a right, without going to the people for a constitutional amendment, which the people will not buy into, is my view. So I think that there are ways to protect against those kinds of things within a constitutional republic.
Okay, Bruce, same question. What mechanisms would be in place to deal with any overreach if it happens?
Well, I want to address one of the big tensions in these models, which is the conflict. We think the conflict is between people and the government, and it often is. But there's a conflict between the individual and the group, the individual and the mob. So if you rule by referendum, if you give power to the people to vote in a referendum about everything, every major thing that comes up, you give it to a vote. Okay, so let's go back to COVID for a minute. If during COVID you gave power to the people to decide in a referendum what's going to happen, and you gave a referendum that said, do you think that everybody should be required to take a vaccine? And if 75% of the people said yes, then everybody would be required to take a vaccine. Your rights notwithstanding, because that's the premise of the system. You're giving power to the people to say, you're giving power to the mob. The alternative is to say, look, no, there are just some places that the state cannot go. It only has a certain number of powers. And if the subject matter does not fall within those powers, I'm sorry, there's nothing you can do. I want to make another very basic point. Here's a trap. The Constitution does not just run on the words that are stated, on the assumption that what the words say is what will be honored. We have words in our Constitution now, in the Canadian Constitution. They say a certain thing. And we found out, lo and behold, that the court doesn't think that they mean what they say. So if you empower an institution, whether it's the legislature or whether it's the court, to have the final say on what the Constitution is and what it means, then essentially you're being ruled by that institution and not by the Constitution. You're being ruled by the people in that institution and not by the words in the Constitution. Your Constitution has to be built, structured in such a way that there is nobody with lasting power inside the state to be able to demand that everybody do things the way they think they want it to be.
Okay, and Matt, so we're going to kind of massage this one a little bit for you. Let's go to the pre-Pierre Elliott Trudeau version, not the post one, because the post one we've seen it's difficult to deal with overreach. What mechanisms would be in place if we went to a more traditional version?
So first of all, in BNA, you looked, the federal and the provincial each have their sphere where they have the task of doing the governance in those areas. I actually agree with Bruce that we could limit those even more and say, there's a few less that they can get involved with. But beyond that, you have a Senate and a Crown that both provide a means of sober second thought when they're done right. When you don't import wingnuts into the Senate, they actually can stop crazy laws and say, hold on a second, we should think about this. You're invoking the Emergencies Act because somebody set up a bouncy castle. We also have to instill the idea that used to be more common, that people don't look to the government for absolutely everything, that the government cannot be at the center. Again, Bruce is just basically a 1200s Richard II era Westminster guy. So good job, Bruce. And then I think we also need to recognize that true legislative supremacy means that if a government goes off track, then when we vote them out, the legislature that follows does have the ability to straighten it out and correct what's done. Now, that is a slower process, a more conservative process. It's not quite so satisfactory because you can't instantly throw the bums out or stop what they're doing. But if we have the ability to vote in a new party into power that can truly make changes, then if one party goes off the rails and the chamber of sober second thought fails, you have the opportunity to adjust it, as when the NDP were thrown out in Alberta and the UCP came in and started changing things back to fix the problems that were done during that time.
Wow, you're really trying to get that Alberta audience on your back or on your side by saying when the NDP got thrown out. They love that one. Next, we're going to go with Bruce, and then Matt, and then Dennis. Courts. What role do courts play under yours? And how much power do they have, or are they restricted? Let's start with Bruce.
Right. So the problem with the courts we have right now, and especially the Supreme Court of Canada, our Supreme Court of Canada essentially has become a kind of star chamber.
Yes.
Because of the system that we have with a Charter of Rights, and because we appoint people to that chamber until age 75, they can sit there for sometimes 20 years and dictate, because they have the power of precedent behind them, what the Constitution means, even though we can all read the document. It doesn't say that, but because they have the power that they do, that's now what it means. So they are the ones making up the Constitution. You can't have that system, but you still need courts. You still need courts to have the power of the state to enforce the law, to make sure that people are not using violence. So how do you square that? What you do is you change the way the judges are appointed. You don't appoint them at all. You elect them, and you elect them for a very short period of time. So it's a revolving door. There are no vested interests on the court. There is no star chamber. You get in, you sit for, you can pick a number, 6 years, 8 years maximum, and then you're out. Okay. And this is going to sound counterintuitive, especially to somebody like Matthew, but you get rid of the power of precedent of the highest court. That power gives the highest court the power to dictate what the law is for the rest of the hierarchy of the courts in the country. Now, if you take that away, I mean, in theory, I love the idea of precedent. Like cases should be decided alike, but that power is creating the star chamber, giving the power to dictate what the Constitution means. If you take that away, then that highest court no longer has that power, and every single time the Constitution needs to be considered, the court in question will go back to the words of the text itself. Now, there's no guarantee that court will interpret those words in the way that you want them to be interpreted in a particular case. That's impossible. But the mistakes are not going to act like a de facto coup over the country. And in that way, what we're trying to do across the board with respect to courts, with respect to legislatures, and especially with respect to the managerial state, the executive branch, we are trying to diffuse power. We're trying to take power away from all of those branches and give it back to the individual to decide things for themselves.
Okay, now Matt, you have the unfortunate position, because we've all seen the Supreme Court. So explain to us how we went from Magna Carta to Magna Justices, and how would you prevent that? What kind of role would courts play?
We would take Trudeau's Charter of Rights and Freedoms out in the backyard and shoot it and bury it somewhere. The big difference between pre-charter and post-charter is not just precedent, but it's the idea that the court doesn't just adjudicate based on the law, but they have the right to adjudicate the law itself based upon the charter, based upon the Constitution. And while they use precedent, sometimes precedent, as Bruce said, isn't necessarily a bad thing. It gives us direction and all these things. The problem is when the court has the right to weigh the law itself and decide whether the law is lawful. So going back to a pre-Pierre Elliott Trudeau system is to return the court actually from a place of supremacy. Even the name Supreme Court is very dramatic, but it is a lie in the old BNA type system, because the court was not allowed to overturn law. When the legislature made law, they could adjudicate based upon that law and upon the precedent that went before. So that's a simple way to rein in the courts, to say to them, you do not have the right to decide if a law is constitutional or not. It is the law that the legislature brought down.
Okay, and now Dennis, same question. What role do the courts play? There's the Supreme Court of the U.S. Things have to change. Circuit courts, a bunch of types of levels of courts. What would that look like here in Alberta?
So the way I'm looking at it is that the courts would be able to interpret and apply the constitutional concepts to law, but they can't change the Constitution itself. They can say this law needs to go this way or that way, or adjudicate it in favor of this person versus that person. The part I agree with Bruce completely on is we should not have lifetime judges. They should be elected. That's my preference. There's a school of thought that says they can be appointed, subject to review, but the thing they aren't is lifetime. They're there for a number of years, pick your poison, and they disappear. The other thing Bruce and I agree on is the absence of precedents requiring that precedent be obeyed and followed for life. I think judges should be expected to look at precedents and say, yep, that makes sense, that applies here, or no, it doesn't, sorry, we're not going to pay attention to that one. So I agree with him on those kinds of things, and that's the structures we built in to to essentially protect people from an overly powerful Supreme Court. The other thing we've got in our structure is the idea of the oversight branch. The controlling function that says, wait a minute, this section is getting out of control. It's also an independent elected branch with a term limit. And they can say, wait a minute, the judges are going too far. We have a means of stopping them, reviewing them, and if necessary, pull them out of office. So we have some limits on judiciary as well.
Okay. And then oversight, we might get back to that one again there, Dennis. So I might dive a little bit deeper in that one. Okay, so the next one is from Matthew, Dennis, then Bruce. It's going to be changes, modifications, amendments. How do we change it once it happens? Is there a mechanism for it, or is it not necessary? Can you please explain how modifications can happen in the future?
So, sorry, Matt.
So to my mind, first of all, a constitution should be very, very short, small, and have as little in the constitutional document as possible. And then the details should be in statute. And what that does is it means the basic constitution doesn't have to be amended often, but where statute has to be amended to update it, to make provision for something that's changed in the way life is. You know, we used to have muskets, now we have machine guns. What do we do about that? You change those things in statutes rather than in the Constitution itself. When you do need to have an amending formula, it should be robust. It should be fairly hard to amend your basic law, because otherwise you are constantly having a turnover. And we see that in different countries where every new party that comes in amends the basic law, and it has this knock-on effect down through the rest. So you can build an amending formula into it, something like the 750 model that we have in Canada is not necessarily bad. The problem is that Canada is so big and so diverse with so many different provinces and people that you never can get them to agree on something that benefits one part of the country because it won't benefit the other. So in a country like Alberta, where we are more homogenous and united, you can have an amending formula that is fairly strict and still is able to pass, whether that be usually through the legislature, the two houses of the legislature and the Crown creating a formula themselves, or whether you have an element of referenda involved in it is a question that could be open to debate.
Yeah, I think ours is pretty strict. 77 provinces, 50% of the population represented. Maybe it could be 7 provinces that have 50% support within that province, so that large ones don't have too much power on that one. Dennis, back to you on this one now. How do you amend? Because we know there's over a couple dozen amendments with the U.S. one, so there's a mechanism in place.
So a couple of factors. I'm going to actually start in a different spot, in that one of the things that we think needs to be done is the constitutional system and documents have to be written very clearly, and so that the ordinary citizen who's not a constitutional scholar can actually read, understand, point to things that they say, yep, that's something I care about, and not written in legalese, so that, you got to be a very smart person like Dr. Pardy to understand what the heck it means. That's one aspect. The second thing is the amending formula we have in the Constitution today is actually 2 structures. One is a supermajority of the legislative assemblies, so that would be the Senate and Assembly of Citizens, so they have to pass that. And lastly is a referendum by the people, and it has to pass that. So that is why the Constitution has to be readable and understandable by the average voter. Now, I do agree also with Matthew that you don't put a lot of crap in the Constitution that really should be in law. We have to find that dividing point. It's never totally black or totally white. There's going to be cases where you say, well, that probably should be in the Constitution, and no, that probably should be in law. And that's why we have these conversations. But our structure would be an informed electorate, an informed citizens that understand what they signed up to with the Constitution, and they being the ultimate authority by vote.
Okay, and Bruce, the same one to you. It's a small Constitution. It's very limited power, very limited government. But if there is a change that's desired, how to go about doing that?
Well, I think it should be difficult, but not impossible. I think I've suggested 2/3 vote in both your legislative chambers and 2/3 vote in a referendum. That's difficult enough. But so while I have a chance, though, one of the difficulties that I have with the premises of both Matthew's and Dennis's constitutions is this: it is appealing to either the knowledge, ability, or ethics, morality of the people involved. You need an informed citizenry. You need an ethical set of politicians. You need responsible government. The assumption is you're going to get such people. And the problem that we've come to today is that we don't have such people. We don't have those kinds of people running the show. And for my money, the Constitution, any Constitution, needs to be designed with the assumption that you are not going to have moral people running the show. James Madison basically said this. If angels were to govern men, you wouldn't need to try and restrain them. The purpose of the Constitution is to restrain the people with power. If the people with power were moral and upright and ethical, you wouldn't need a Constitution. You could just go ahead and give them power and tell them to do what was right. The whole point of having a Constitution is to restrain the people who will do you wrong. And the assumption has to be that you will always have those people in power. And if your Constitution doesn't work with those kinds of people in power, then your Constitution does not work. It has to work regardless of the character of the people who have power.
And I know you don't have access to my notes, but that was my next point. And the next question was, what is the presumed mechanism in there? Honorable or dishonorable people are going to be running it. So Bruce, I'll come to you third if you want to tack on any more afterward. Dennis goes next, and then Matt. Because do you have a constitution that assumes there's going to be good people or not good people? Dennis?
I assume we're going to have normal, average people. And the reason why I think we can get there is by eliminating the whole idea of career politicians with term limits and also controlling the rogue ones via an oversight body. So the expectation is not that we have perfect people being elected, because that's never going to happen, but that when they get in, they get identified and removed, hopefully by the oversight branch, and also they're term limited. So the motivation for people to come in, I'm going to be a politician, I'm going to make $1 bajillion, pick on Justin Trudeau, starts off at being worth 20 million, ends up worth 350 million based upon a $300,000 a year salary. You know there's something went amiss there. So you put those controls in, and that's the way I generally see things, is there's a balancing act. I get where Dr. Pardy's coming from, saying, hey, keep it minimal because it'll get screwed up. I get where Matthew's going with, like, keep it stable with the past. We're trying to find that balance between the two, and that's why justly the Constitutional Republic is in the middle, trying to strike that middle balance between these two positions.
Okay. And then Matthew, we had this conversation this morning, and I understand your position, but go ahead and share yours. Should you be worried if they're honorable or dishonorable? What was your constitutional setup for that?
I do believe that, every thought of our heart is inclined towards evil always, and that there is always an element of us that is perhaps untrustworthy, which is why we do have to have certain limits. But I presume Albertans, and I presume that Albertans will have the ability, as they have in the past through many long, wonderful journeys, they will have good politicians who will last a long time, and then at some point somebody will mess it up, and the Albertans will turf those people out on their ears and put in a new set of good people. And it's actually the tradition that we have is a strong, independent society that values our leaders but doesn't trust them too far. And it's that standard that we can keep as Albertans. It's essentially what we already have. Let's keep doing that within a Westminster system that does not have people with different values from the rest of Canada causing it to be muddied.
Making a good argument for independence right there. So thanks for that. But Bruce, if you want to tack on after you've heard Dennis and Matt, they say a little bit of trust, but some restraints and some guidelines.
Yeah, no, listen, I don't think it's an unreasonable desire, but I think it's a little naive, because this is how we got to where we are. We are in a system now that is being run by, well, not to a person. I'm not saying everybody in power right now is evil. That's not true. But a lot of people in power are doing things that a lot of us don't approve of. And what can we do about it? Well, we have elections. That doesn't work. You can see it doesn't work. We have elections at the provincial level. We have elections at the federal level. We have elections at the municipal level. Do those elections ever really change very much in terms of the direction of the country, the degree to which our bureaucracies impose upon us? No. You need to make a fresh start. You need to turn the page here. You're going to have a moment where you are trying to reestablish a different kind of civilization. If all you do is create some, new checks and balances, if you do what we've always done, what we've always done all the way along for hundreds and hundreds of years, starting, back when the king had power, all we have ever done is move absolute power around. The king had it first, and then we moved it to legislatures, which is where Matthew wants it to rest. The Americans recognized that legislatures can be tyrants too. And so they put in a Bill of Rights and gave courts the power to decide when the state had gone too far. That didn't work out either. I mean, it worked out better in the States than it ever has here, but it wasn't perfect. You can see the holes. And now, today, what's happening is the legislatures and the courts are moving power back to the king, but it's not the king anymore. Now it's the managerial state. Okay. If you want to fix this, you're going to stop moving power around and instead take power away from your government, from your institutions, from your politicians, from your bureaucrats, from your judges. Take it away. Take back control. Your life is yours. If we keep arguing about, who has the last call? Who has the last call? Is it courts? Is it an oversight branch? Is it the legislature? So these are all state institutions. The power should not rest with them.
Sounds neat. I'll use that word for now as we make our way through this one, Bruce. Okay, so the next one's going to be Matt, Dennis, and then Bruce. Party system, two-party system, first past the post. How's the electoral system?
Definitely, a party system is important. All of these things came about because they were needed. That's something to remember. And again, it's why I like to be a conservative. Don't tear something down until you know what it's for and you've learned to value it, and then either change it or in some cases destroy it. But if you cut down a tree because you didn't like where it was and then you decide that actually it was pretty good, you can't just put it back on the stump and hope it'll keep growing. So with things like the party system, it came about because there had to be some order and coherence in forming a government within the legislature. And it's good to have usually a two-party system, but I actually like the Canadian three-party system, believe it or not. You have this kind of wild card party that can be the protest vote and take the balance of power in the parliament from time to time if you want to send the government a certain message. You want to keep them in power, but you want to reduce the amount of power they have. So a party system is good and healthy and has its place. Anytime you have independent people, we'll just have independent legislators. Or legislators. Within 5 minutes, they've somehow grouped themselves because you need to be able to organize. You need to be able to fund it. You need to be able to have some sort of coherence that gets the government's program through the legislature. And if it's all independent, it's really great until humans start acting like humans and you have 46 chiefs in the legislature and nobody's willing to follow anybody else. So we have parties to create order because part of the goal, we see the Canadian thing, peace, order, good government, is that we should have an ordered government that is good and that functions.
Okay, Dennis, same question. Is there a party system, and how does that work with the elections?
Well, as usual, I find myself halfway between Matthew and Bruce. One of the concepts that Dr. Pardy brought forward is the whole idea of the amateur state. Get rid of these professionals, and that's something I fully endorse. The other thing I agree with on Matthew is that there needs to be some structure, needs to be some sort of parties, that because people will run around like chickens with their heads cut off if you just let them wander around. So, but what we're seeing is something where there is a party system. I actually don't care if it's 2 or 3 or 5. It probably won't be 25, but they're relatively weaker because in the case of the Westminster system, if the party in power loses a vote of confidence, then of course need a new election, and I don't like that at all. So you want to be able to sort of say, well, you can try and pass legislation that doesn't make it. Let's keep on going. So you have a weaker party, and it's weaker in part because of things like term limits. You can't have career politicians who hang around for 35 years amassing fortunes. You say you got your 8 years, you do your thing, 2 terms in the Senate, you're out. And so they're still not completely amateurs the way Bruce thinks, but they're not completely embedded politicians we can't get rid of. And that's the balance we see.
Okay, and then Bruce, party. Is there a party system?
Yeah, I broadly agree with Dennis on the term limits thing. I do believe in an amateur government. That's the way I put it. You do not want a professional ruling class with their thumb over you. But one of the reasons that parties have acquired such a lot of power in our system is because governments do so much. Because governments have a lot of power, parties have a lot of power. So the real solution to parties having too much power is governments that don't have power. Now, what you ideally want is you want a legislature with people who have been elected, sitting in the chamber, twiddling their thumbs, thinking, what are we going to do today? We have no power. Everything is done. We can't interfere with this or that. We can't dictate that or this. Like, we have nothing to do. And you can have parties there if you want. The parties shouldn't be dictated by the Constitution. If people who are elected want to gather together in groups and say, we all believe in this, well, that's fine. They're free people. They can explain what it is that they stand for, and they stand for it all together. That's fine. That's a party. So I don't think we should outlaw parties, but the importance of parties is a problem because it reflects the importance of governments. The Constitution should minimize the importance of government. If you do that, then the party problem goes away.
So you're raining on the party a little bit, but okay, that's cool. I like that a lot. Okay, so now it's going to be Dennis, Bruce, and Matt for the next one. Dealing with specifically Alberta, would there be one level of government, or would it be a national, a regional, municipal? How would the government break down, if at all? Let's start with Dennis.
So we see a single level of government where municipalities are really the only other layer, but they're essentially creatures of that single layer. They would be paid for by grant. They wouldn't be be able to create laws other than a very minor sense under the guise of the legislatures. And so certainly not a provincial level or something in between. So what we do have, though, is a bicameral system where you've got like I said, a Senate representing regions and a Assembly of Citizens representing the will of the broader people, the number of people, and that's the only structure you have.
I see a lot of nodding out of Bruce, and you're next, Bruce. Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah. Well, yes. One level. Don't make this complicated. You don't want to grow your government, make it big and unwieldy like we have now. We're trying to get away from what we have now. We have a problem now. We're trying to fix it. Let's not reproduce it. That's the last thing you want to do. If you're trying to live in a free country, as a lot of Albertans are saying, and thank goodness for that, let's just ask this question. What does that mean? And for my money, if you are free, you are not coerced by other people. That is, not by your fellow citizens and not by the state. That is, you are not subject to their force or threats of force to make you do what you don't want to do. Okay, one level of government with some very basic rules, and that's the first one. No force allowed by people or by the state. If you have that rule and you have all your property rights and so on, you have your contract rights, you're able to deal with people, then you don't need all the bureaucracy, you don't need municipalities, you don't need all the layers, you don't need all the people. You just need simple government with simple principles to allow people to run their own lives.
Well, Matt, now the ball's in your court. Are we going to get a consensus on this one, or should it be broken down further?
First of all, I'd say government is a historic reality because we do need ordering of our lives. We have municipal, provincial, and federal government, and you'll see a similar thing in pretty much every country because there are different layers of order that are required. We don't want the feds mandating, where you can take your dog for a walk in the city. I do think that it's better to have a federal and provincial level because I envision for Alberta that very soon Saskatchewan will join us, and I'm guessing they won't want to just come in under our laws. I mean, if they would, cool, but I'm guessing they would still want to have some sort of provincial autonomy over certain aspects. So I think it's actually good to have those separate levels of government, with municipalities being a creature of the province as we have now. Now, I would be open to a single layer of government, but when we're looking at the vastness of even Western Canada, and if we're believing that other provinces will actually look at us and say, hey, I want to join, it's going to be a hard sell to them to say, yes, you can join, but you have to give up your legislature and your areas of government that are under your control. We want freedom, and it's very hard to say to someone else, give up your freedom to us, trust us with all of those areas that previously you've self-governed. So I would preserve the self-government of provinces that we have now, with the expectation that we would see other provinces joining Alberta in this project.
So maybe at the beginning, and then if somebody else joins, take another look at it. But at least we have 2 out of 3 saying one level of government, with municipalities treated a little bit differently. Okay, so this one will go to Bruce, Dennis, and then Matt. Inquiries, oversight by people. So what kind of power do the people have while the government is functioning? So we'll start with I think I said Bruce, Dennis, and then Matt.
You mean in terms of recall and such things? I don't think if you do things the way I'm suggesting, you don't need any of that, because because governments, legislatures, executive branches will have such minimal amount of power to start with that your complaint, if there's going to be one, is they're trying to do something they have no jurisdiction to do. If that happens, you go to a court and say, look, this is what the Constitution says. The Constitution says they have the power to keep the peace, resolve disputes, protect the country. And that's all. And now they're trying to make me wear a helmet while I ride my bike. That doesn't fit in any of those things. Make them stop. And the court will read the Constitution and say, yeah, you can't do that. Go away. That's all you need. I mean,
well, let me give you an example under your one, maybe make this a little easier. Let's say the government decided to go and invade other countries because they got the power to go ahead and do stuff outside the border. So using all the resources to go and colonize or take other countries.
Sure. So vote the bums out. Remember, the people, again, under my model, the people who are in power doing this are not in there very long. They're up for re-election maybe once, if that, and then they're gone. And then they're back to being a member of the public like everybody else. There is no political elite here. There is no ruling class. And so if these people, want to survive as a normal person after they've done what they've done, they better be damn careful that they use their power judiciously and don't go off the deep end. But I'm not inclined to all of these layers of procedures and checks and so on. It should be clean. People should know that they have a vote to elect. By the way, my bicameral model, just to pick up on something that Matthew alluded to, is a lot like the American one. And I think maybe Dennis's is as well. So what you want to do is you want to elect, it's a two-chamber idea. You elect one chamber representation by population, that is one person, one vote. And you elect the other chamber based upon not population, but upon territory. That is every equally sized piece of Alberta gets to elect like two people to that chamber. And that way you offset the distorting effects of population concentration in urban areas. When you have that, like the states does, each state elects 2 senators, but elects congressmen based upon population. Then you have hopefully a more balanced representative system, and that will carry you to the next election.
Okay, Dennis, same question. Inquiries, oversight by people, direct democracy. What kind of tools exist?
So I tend to find myself agreeing with Bruce on a number of points, but one of the main ones is that with term limits, you of course have to return back to society. And if you've been a really bad politician, that's not going to bode well for how well people want to do business with you or whatever. So I agree with that particular aspect. I do, however, see that bad people will get into office and try and do things, particularly around getting more money into their pockets, writing sweetheart deals, whatever the case might be. I think there has to be a mechanism for citizens of that riding, whether it be for Senate or Assembly of Citizens part, that they can actually go and say, Dennis, we thought you were a good guy. You've proven to be a real idiot. We definitely don't want you even for this term, certainly not another one. And have the people of that riding be able to recall you. Now, that has to have a bit of a barrier. I think some structure that says you have to have a threshold before you can do such a thing. And then, of course, you have to get a majority at least to recall the guy, but effectively you give them that mechanism. And the last thing is for things that are a little bit more insidious and harder to pick out, that's where that oversight branch comes in again to say, wait a minute, we can convene a grand jury to go after Dennis and say, you're actually working under the table, not visibly, and you are subverting the government and the Constitution, and we have a right to check you out and ultimately take you out.
All right, and then Matt, question to you. We've seen the government over the last at least 10 years get away with a whole bunch of things. How would it work under the revised or going back to the original Westminster system?
So first of all, I'd say with term limits, all you do then is you just bump the political elite one level out. So instead of having the political elite be the people that are in forever, you have the political elite who have their puppet who will then sit there for their term limited period. But at the end of the day, their masters will still be the ones that determine it. A term limit does not in any way preserve us from a ruling class, because ruling classes always do exist and always will. It's just the people that manage to figure out how to work the system. So what you need to have is first accountability to the House. Ministers, government has an accountability to the House. They must keep the confidence of the House. And if a minister or the government loses the confidence of the House, they can be fired. Then they have accountability to public opinion. If the public shouts loud enough and says, hey, what are you doing? Sends in petitions, then the government realizes that what they're doing is going to harm them. They will lose re-election. And in the last ditch, similar to what Dennis is saying, you have the Crown, who is actually in charge of appointing them. Ministers serve at the pleasure of the Crown. So if they go off the rails so badly that they won't even listen to public opinion, that they don't care what the House says, then the Crown steps in and says, sorry, your time is done, and they dissolve the House or they fire the minister.
Okay, and we're in our last 5 minutes before we hit the questions from the audience. So audience, go ahead and start throwing those questions in. I'm sure you got a few of them. Next one, it will go in, I think, the order of least difficulty. So we'll go with Matthew, Dennis, and Bruce on this one. Let's say Alberta picks yours. What would the transition from the current government that we have right now look like to go towards yours? So what would the transition look like? Would it be difficult? Be hard? What do you think? Matt?
It should be fairly easy because it involves separating off Ottawa. Now, it's not going to be roses and sunshine. There's always an adjustment period, and it's not difficult. It's just easier when all the laws stay the same, all the terms stay the same, all of the precedents are the same, the structures are all there. All we're doing is adjusting it, looking at the old British North America Act and saying, hey, how do we want to make it new? Or looking at other Westminster models and saying, how do we want ours to function along those lines? Adjusting it as we need to, and then going forward from the place that we were, which allows us to continue in the traditions, the precedents, the conventions of the Westminster system. You can keep the Crown, whether you like King Charles or not. The good news is he has no direct effect on you in your day-to-day life. Great to have them over there on the other side of the ocean, but you can just have a Governor General the same as you do. You don't have to change a lot, which means that there will not be a lot of upheaval and there will actually be a lot of stability, even as you are making those adjustments.
And then Dennis, what would the transition look like to a constitutional republic?
Well, it wouldn't be easy, but I also don't see it being extraordinarily difficult, because many of the laws we have today, up like the criminal code, actually they're not hugely different from what we would want under the Constitution as we imagine it. So some of those could be just essentially continued, and there would of course be a body where we'd say the new legislatures would have to redo this law very quickly, a matter of urgency. Some where it'd be fairly minor revisions, but again, redone, and some almost cut and paste. Take out the old name Canada and put in Alberta and you're done. So I see this process going on over a number of years, but in parallel, I also see a cleanup of government. So I think of the Doge kind of thing where you go through and say, all right, not only do we clean up the financial mess and the expense of government, we also go through and clean up the legislative mess and get rid of old laws that really ought not to apply, may not fit the Constitution, and really ought to be simplified and eliminated. So I think the legislatures would be quite busy for the first 2 or 3 terms in the model we propose, but after that it should settle down to a more normal level of business with relatively little legislation going on.
And then Bruce, obviously, it's a little bit more radical and hasn't been done. So there's going to be at least an education portion to this transition. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm talking about ending the nanny state. And there's going to be some transition there. I mean, especially with respect to interests that people have garnered over time. So, for example, if you've been paying into a pension, into a state pension, Well, you've been paying money into a pension. That you need to be able to be granted your interests in that pension, even though we're not going to do that anymore. The biggest transition, though, is the idea, to get people's head around the idea that the state is not empowered to do a lot of these things anymore. Like, it cannot make policies about most of the things that you're used to the state making policies about. The state has no power to tax and spend on a single payer healthcare system. Like, it can't be done. It's not a matter of policy decisions. It can't be done. The state does not have the power to dictate curriculum to educate your child. It cannot be done. So whenever people think of, how they think that, social problems ought to be solved and look to governments to solve it, that's not the idea anymore. That's the biggest transition. Yes, there'll be some mechanical things, for sure. No question about it. But the biggest one is governments are not there to do those jobs, people. This is on us. We do this ourselves.
Okay, and then this last question, and it's meant to kind of make you think a little bit about your position, and it's going to go Dennis, Bruce, and Matt. If you can't, let's just say you can't pick yours, which one would you pick of the other two, and why? Start with Dennis.
Tough question. I'll be blunt. I think ultimately I would settle on a modified Westminster system, because I do believe that I like libertarianism, the way Bruce describes it. I like the idea of self-sufficiency, but I know that doesn't cover quite a few people. So I'd probably say no. I would aggressively work within the Westminster system to put some of the tougher rights in that I've been advocating, but ultimately that's where I would go.
All right, Bruce, if you can't go radical, which way do you want to go?
So let's just compare the situation between two representatives of these choices. The Republican choice, and I know it's not exactly the same as what these folks are, what Dennis and Matthew are prescribing, but this just metaphorically. There's the UK, which is still pretty much a legislative supremacy system, and you have the US, which is alleged to be a Republican system. The US has a Bill of Rights, and the UK does not, essentially. It has the European, but don't worry about that. Question: which of these two countries, they both did badly, and we all did badly, but which of these two countries did worse during COVID? Which of these two countries did worse during the present free speech crisis? And so on down the line of all these problems. I think on balance, you will find, as badly as it has done, the US has fared better under its Republican system than under the British Westminster legislative supremacy system. I do not trust legislatures to be the final word on anything anymore. They do all kinds of crazy, stupid, tyrannical things. And so much as I dislike the record of our Supreme Court of Canada on our charter and our Constitution, I think they made a real hash of it. But the Americans have done better with their system. The Americans have what is right now, even though it has lots of flaws in it. Their model right now is the gold standard of existing constitutions. So if I'm going to pick one, not my own, then I'm going to pick Dennis's, because it's the closest to the American system.
Okay, and then Matt, you can either break the tie or create a three-way tie. What's your answer?
If I can't do the existing, if we're forced and all Albertans are forced to put their guns to the head and say we're going to do something new and different and radical one way or another, I would actually be tempted to go with Bruce. On the logic that I do actually agree with him a lot in the theoretical sense of the role of government and those type of things. The reason that I'm advocating for what I'm advocating is because of practicality of where we are, the history that we have, bringing people with us on this journey, et cetera, et cetera. But if we're going to go no holds barred, I wrote actually a master's thesis arguing pretty much what Bruce is saying as far as the role of the government, and saying that it's actually the role of the church and other social organizations to do anything social. And I agree with that from a theoretical sense. The problem is we'd be going from way over here to way over there. And that would be too much of a shock, and you would cause such dislocation to people that it would be problematic. But if I was forced to choose, I'd actually go hang out with Bruce in the radical corner.
That's incredible. The one that requires no force is the one that you felt forced to choose. And here's kind of a good example of what we're talking about here. We've got a three-way tie. So this is why we have these conversations. So now let's jump to our Q&A. We're going to bring back the ladies to help us out with this. Angela, welcome back. Pat, welcome back. And Kathy, welcome back. So right before we jump into the questions, I want to ask each one of you a question. Angela, starting with you. What do you think of this panel and the conversation we just had here?
Oh, fantastic conversation and so needed. And we've been watching the chats, and it is just very lively. All these different thoughts and ideas coming forward has really stimulated, I believe, a lot of people thinking about this, and it has probably answered and answered some questions that they've had for a long time. So I'm really, really excited for it.
Question for you, Pat, as well. You don't have to pick a winner, but what do you think of this conversation so far?
Oh, I like to pick winners, but I won't this time. Fabulous conversation, everything I thought it would be and more. And I think we should keep doing rounds of it, because an hour and a half is just not enough time. So I have a lot of questions. Hopefully I'll have time to ask them.
Well, we put time term limits on this conversation, so we've got to feel what that's like. Kathy, what did you think of this conversation?
This is exactly what we've been waiting for and hoping would happen tonight. And I just hope everybody's ready, because we're going to do a part 2. We have to. We do.
Oh, yes. And 3 and 4 and 5.
Mhm.
So did you hear that, gentlemen? You've been elected to another term. Okay, so let me go ahead.
I want term limits.
Two parts. So I don't know. We'll have to debate this once more. The first question is for Matthew directly. Matthew, the Westminster model relies more on conventions rather than hard constitutional limits. Why should the new nation of Alberta rely on unwritten expectations? Matthew.
Because it keeps the constitutional limits out of the realm of the courts and being adjudicated by the courts. If it's convention, then it's everybody saying, yeah, that's how it always has worked out. And you have to go with the way that it was in the past. So, looking at the US with their arguments over a simple idea, everyone has the right to keep and bear arms. Well, they're always questioning this and that. But the way you do it with convention is just, so have you always been able to own a gun? Yeah, we've always been able to own a gun. Then you can own a gun. Have a nice day. It's actually simpler, and it allows public opinion as well as the legislature to weigh in on it rather than firing it off to the courts.
All righty. Hopefully, and we got a few from the same one. So we actually took the time to ask a question from each of you. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, with Alberta Nation for Independence. By the way, they were watching this morning and had questions, said bring them this afternoon, and that's exactly what they did. This one's for Dennis. How do you prevent a directly elected president from accumulating excessive personal power in a young nation?
Well, no question, that first election is going to be pivotal. So let's, as voters, be really informed on who our choices will be. But remember, the president is subject to the same term limits, the same recall options, and everything that every other elected position is subject to. So if the guy tries to do dumb stuff, recall him. The oversight branch can check for failures and pull him from office if necessary. And I think that's the control we put in place.
All right. Quick answer there. Thank you very much, Dennis. And then the next one here is for Bruce from the same user. Bruce, who has final authority to interpret the Constitution? Bruce.
An excellent question. An excellent question. This is part of the problem, right? The answer is each court that hears each case. Because you have the buck has to land somewhere. But the answer is not the Supreme Court, 9 judges who sit for the rest of their lives. If you leave it to each court hearing each case, then the interpretation of that document might change from case to case to case to case. And that's unfortunate because that's unpredictable. We don't want unpredictability. But on the other hand, if you're going to diffuse power inside your system, then you're going to have to leave it with the judges. And I won't go into details, but I've described a court system wherein you, for example, you have trial courts made of 2 judges who have to agree in order to convict somebody or find somebody liable. And the interpretation that they give has to be consistent with each other. The meaning they give to the words of the text. And then you leave that case and you go to the next case with a panel of 2 and so on. So in other words, what you're doing is you're giving more people who are elected and on short terms, short leashes, the responsibility of interpreting the Constitution for the purpose of that case and that case alone. And so their power is curbed.
All right. And because we are still a capitalist society, we're going to bring up our super chat next. And it's a question for all 3. So let's go ahead and do that. Prairie Cossack asks, what's the panel's opinion on getting rid of universal voting right and making it a privilege? Let's start with Bruce on that one, please.
Okay, the problem with any of these ideas, like, it makes sense that only these people should be able to vote, or only these people should be able to do X. The problem is that decision itself requires somebody to make it. So who are you going to choose to make that decision? Like, is it the people altogether? Are we back to mob rule? So my answer is no. Look, if you're going to live in a democracy, every citizen, and I think it should be limited to citizens, every citizen of a certain age should get a vote. In other words, the same rules apply to every citizen of majority age. Other than that, if you're going to mess with that, then you're really messing around with things.
Okay, so it is a privilege for citizens of majority age. Let's go to Matt next on that one.
I would agree. Practically speaking, what we have now is what we have. Part of me likes the old 40 shilling freehold, the idea that you need a stake in the government, in the life of the nation before you have the right to vote, so that it avoids the politics of envy and the whole eat the rich and I'll take from the rich to give to you, the poor, if you give me your vote. But practically speaking, age of majority, 18 years old, universal voting rights for all citizens, as Bruce said, is a good standard that has been effective across many countries and many constitutions.
All right. Well, Dennis, let's see if you knock our socks off. Do you have a different answer than the 2 gentlemen there?
No, citizens reach the age of 18, you get to vote. That's the deal. The one adder I'd put in is I think it should be a requirement to vote. So I literally think I think Australia does this. You pay $100 fine if you don't show up to vote without a reasonable excuse. Because I think that if we're going to depend on citizens deciding how we want to run, they sure the heck better not say, I'm too tired, I'm too lazy, I can't be bothered to vote.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I kind of like that one as well. It's rights and responsibilities. People keep forgetting that responsibility.
You won't be surprised if I don't. But anyway.
Of course, no force, right? No force in yours. The force be with you. Okay, so here we go. Here's another one for a little bit more timely for the current system. Would anyone's system allow floor crossing? Let's go ahead and start with Dennis on this one.
So floor crossing is this construct in my mind of the Westminster system. So I see it more as there is no such thing as floor crossing. It's more about you vote in favor of a proposed law or action, or you don't. It doesn't. You belong to the party the day after as you did the day before.
Okay, and then Matt, floor crossing.
I think if in the Westminster system, it's true, there is a room for it. If the person who's crossing the floor has truly consulted their constituents and it's a matter of deep principle and not a brown paper bag or a skeleton in the closet, there's actually a room for someone. Churchill famously not only ratted but re-ratted based on principles. So I think there's room for it, but it shouldn't be this shoddy, shabby thing that we've just witnessed. And especially if a floor crossing leads to a change of majority, that would actually be a cause for the king to step in and dissolve the government for an election, because you've lost or you've gained a majority not through the will of the people through an election, but rather through backroom dealing.
King Charles, are you listening? King Charles, somebody clip that, send it to him. Bruce, your thoughts?
No, I agree with Dennis. This is one of the flaws for me of the Westminster system. If you're in a Republican American type system where there's a separation of powers between executive and legislature, in the American system, you can belong to one party and vote for or against a bill introduced by the other party. You're elected as a representative to exercise your own judgment. You do what you think is best, and then people will judge your voting record.
Okay, fair enough. This next one, I think I know which is the smallest, but let's see what the other two say as well. From Healthy Full, what model has the smallest government, limits its future expansion, and does not completely give away monopolies on force? Let's go with Bruce, because I already know that answer, I think.
Well, mine's the smallest government and has the most limits on its future expansion, does not completely give away monopoly on force. So let me just describe the way force works in my constitution. The state can't use force. It's one of the first rules, because if people are going to be free, then the state can't be using force against it, except that the state has to use force to enforce the rule against force, right? Because if you don't enforce that rule, it's not a rule. If you have a law that says no one can use force, then the state needs to use its force to enforce that rule. So we have not completely given away the monopoly on force. A monopoly on force for that purpose is the thing that manages to keep the peace. If you don't have that, then you have anarchy.
The only force is to enforce the use of force. Okay, lots of forces in one sentence. Congratulations on that one. Dennis, your thoughts there. Traditionally, the U.S., a large government, right? So how small could that government end up being, and do they have monopoly on force?
So definitely within the structure we're looking at, it would be, there have to be other controls within the Constitution. We see things, for example, like a fixed percentage of the previous year's GDP as a control on spending to keep government from growing. But I also look at the example of Texas in the U.S., which has its own constitution, its own structures, as they negotiated their way in after U.S. was formed. And you sort of say, let's put some of those structures in place that actually prevent government from meeting too often. Like I think their rule is the government can only meet for so many weeks per year. That's it. Get your job done, and otherwise wait until next year. So I think we can put in some controls to limit the growth of government and the size of government. As far as monopoly on force, this is where Bruce and I do disagree. I think there has to be some element of managerial state in there that includes using force, much the same way as I think he said. And essentially we can say, look, my neighbor wants to build a 3-story purple chicken coop on their backyard. That's against the law. The state is going to come in and remove it or get them to remove it. So there is some element of force in what we're doing.
Yeah, you have something against chicken coops. You said that on my episode as well. I'm not sure what the prejudice is. Maybe you like pigs. I don't know. Matt, same question. Is there an element of force, and how can you have smaller government and stop the expansion?
I think we do see a good example of this in the current Alberta government. Albertans like smaller governments, and you usually win when you say, I'll make the government smaller. Sometimes at the same time, the government just goes ahead and makes something bigger. But the ability is there to make the government as small as the electors want and to limit its future expansion. In Alberta, we see this. The person who stands up and says, I'm going to tax you more and do more things, usually we say, yeah, that's a bad idea. And on the monopoly of force, I do believe government does have the monopoly on lawful force, or not a total monopoly, but like Bruce says, the monopoly on who gets to have force and adjudicating that. So we should have the right to, self-defense and these other things where we use force as private individuals, but there should be an adjudicator of that private force in the government, hence law. And that goes back to the very dawn of time. So in the Westminster model, it is up to the electors how small and limited they want their government to be.
All right. What I want to do now is I'm going to go to Kathy, and sorry to put you on the spot here, but Kathy, as you were sitting in the chat going through a bunch, and then I'll go to Pat and then Angela after, was there some question or a question that came up a lot that you'd like to bring forward? I got a lot more to go, so I can keep going through the queue, but was there something that came up a few times while you were in the chat?
Not the ones that I was watching, no, that aren't already here in the general chat that we have going on, us ladies here. It pretty much is in there good. So I would just keep going.
Okay. Pat, I actually think there's one in here from you. How about I go ahead and bring that up, and then will address your question right now. So why do you believe a governor general or lieutenant governor is more effective shield against tyranny than Pardy's oversight branch, which can subpoena and remove corrupt officials directly? So I guess this is for Matt, and then we could actually ask the other two gentlemen to jump in on this one as well after. So Matt?
It's actually Dennis's oversight branch.
Yes.
Or Dennis is, not Pardy's. Okay.
Yeah, I think
Dennis,
the governor general,
lieutenant governor is more effective.
yeah, governor general or lieutenant governor have that ability to fire, if so needed, ministers of the crown or other people within that system for this exact reason. Why wait to subpoena them? Why not just fire them if they are? It's meant to be a last resort. It's meant to be the final tool that is rarely used. I think the last time it was actually used was the 1970s in Australia, if I'm correct. Bruce can correct me on that. But it was used in a case where a prime minister refused to vacate his office despite losing an election and the voice of the people. So there, the governor general said, "You're gone, buddy." And it was as simple as that. So it's actually easier than with a subpoena system or any other sort of thing. They just fire the guy.
All right. And then Dennis will come to you because you're the one that has the oversight branch. Why do you think that's more effective than a governor general and lieutenant governor?
So actually the whole concept of the oversight branch came from a discussion between Matt and myself around, he was pushing the role of governor general and so forth for the very function he just described. We thought about it and talked about it, and sort of what I concluded is you need that final check and balance to get rid of someone that's misbehaving in some fashion. So the difference is I don't trust individuals. I actually want to have, a formal process, a grand jury or a group of people that look at this and look at the evidence and say, yes, in fact, Dennis, you're a bad dude, out you go, rather than depending upon the whim of a governor general or lieutenant general. Witness the last two governor generals we've had, maybe the last 3 or 4, and I go, man, we're getting some awfully stupid ones, and I don't see a protection against that.
And then Bruce, is your position none of the above? And if so, why?
None of the above. None of the above. Here's why. Checks and balances are kind of nice in theory, and sometimes they work, but sometimes they don't work. A lot of the times they don't work, and they don't work at precisely the moment you need them the most. And I think, again, one of the best examples of this is COVID. You didn't have an oversight branch during COVID, but if you had, would the oversight branch have been different than the other 3 branches you already have? The legislature, the bureaucracy, the courts? The problem is this: when you have checks and balances inside a single beast, that is the state, what often happens, as is happening today, is that all of those branches, which are checks and balances in theory on each other, they all basically are on the same page about the big picture question. Sure, they have their disputes and quarrels, but in the big picture, they all were on the same page on the necessity for the state to govern society and keep people safe with the measures that were introduced during COVID. And none of them would step out and say, no, this is wrong. And if you are giving the final authority to some other branch inside the state to do the same thing, then again, all you're doing is moving power around. You're making the buck stop here instead of here or here or here. You have still not done the most important thing, which is to say, sorry, this is not for you. This is for the individual people out there. And you have no jurisdiction to make these calls in the first place.
Okay, fantastic question there, Pat. Angela, did you have a question you want to throw in here at this stage, or just move on to the next one?
Yeah, actually I do. So I noticed in the chats that there was a lot of reaction to the idea of remaining under the crown. And so my question is for Matthew, how would this actually benefit us as Albertans to remain under the crown? What does that do for us?
So the crown provides us a locus of ultimate authority that is not political and that does not exercise day-to-day power. In other words, you can be loyal to them, fiercely loyal, and you can still hate the government's guts and think the prime minister is a doofhead. And both are permitted at the same time. It provides us with those ultimate reserve powers that don't rest or vest authority ultimate in the government as a permanent institution. Rather, the government comes and goes, it is dissolved and reconstituted, and there is that sense that government is not eternal, or like Bruce said, this state that is this ultimate thing that is above all other things. So it protects us from that. And it avoids the whims of a government, because at the end of the day, you have this person who is a thinking, feeling human being who theoretically, and I would argue actually with the majority of our kings and queens of the past, care for their people and are able to help them. Just one little point with the Queen, bless her heart, I loved her to death. She would go in as she was going on walkabout into the store to look at the price of goods, because she wanted to know what her people were being charged for food, because of course she had people to get her food. She cared enough to look at the little details, to stop and hear the little people. And having someone like that, who is the father or the mother of the nation, as it were, who is disconnected from the daily grind of the political process, provides us a locus for ceremonial and for unity.
All right. And something to look at on your dollar bills as well. So
That's
Bruce
right.
said check and balances a few times, and the next one is a different type of check and balance. So Dave Annis for 526, who represents 4,525 other Dave Annises out there. His question is, how does your constitution strictly prohibit fiat money printing and the resulting erosion of citizen purchasing power? 337 million was printed in February 2026, eroding wealth. Wow, none of that ended up here. Let's start with Bruce on that one.
Great question. Great question. It's important that the state not have the power to do that. And that's exactly what I'm describing, right? So in this flipping the default thing, the state has the power to do nothing except, what's the list? If the list is keep the peace, resolve disputes, protect the country, one of the things that's not in that list is printing money, having a central bank, setting interest rates, having monetary policies. It has no power to do any of those things. It cannot be done. There is no policy. There will be no legislation. It is outside the limits of what the state is empowered to do, period.
Okay, Dennis?
Yeah, I mean, while I agree conceptually with what Bruce wrote, the reality is we need money. We need means of exchange. And we don't want to have everyone wandering around with piles of gold or diamonds or whatever, arguing what's worth what. So you do need a method of exchange, and that's called money. Now, the fiat money problem is a different one, because going off the gold standard, for example, way back when, was one of the larger mistakes in our histories. So within things like the value of freedom, we put in the aspect that the currency must be backed. Now, do we put that in the Constitution? Perhaps yes, perhaps no. But that is the concept, is that the fiat currency doesn't exist. It's this represents so much oil, so much precious mineral, so much whatever, and we can't issue more currency until we have more of those other precious things of real value. And I think that's the control we would put in. Fiat currency is a curse on our worlds, for sure.
And Matt, the king or queens all over the currency. So how would this work for you?
Gotta love it. A central bank and a currency are important to any modern economy. Just look, all the great economies have them for a reason. But it is true, a fiat currency that is unbacked by any sort of real tangible wealth, whether it be commodities, gold, silver, is going to be one that erodes the wealth of people because it is inflationary. Now, you can avoid that chiefly in statute. Like I say, keep the Constitution small and the statutes do the work. But you have to limit the right of the government to print its way out of its money problems. And that comes down to, going back to the last question, the limitation of the size of government and the role of government into areas that they should be. And the people saying, if you go into those other areas, you're going to have a problem.
Okay, and as we get into this next question here, Suna Soul Silver, has any country ever tried Bruce's suggestion of government? I've honestly never heard of this type of government before. So Bruce, one for you, bud.
Right. Not to my knowledge. Never been tried in the real world. I mean, lots of people have talked about the various ways that one might achieve an actually free country. But in the real world, no, because there are too many vested interests who are determined not to do it this way. Here's one of the problems. There's going to be great resistance to this kind of a model for the very reason, if I may put it this way, for the very reason is that it would work. It would work to prevent the accumulation of both political and economic power at the top levels of the architecture, right? So, no, it has not been done. It has not been done. This is, I mean, I'd like to think that this is one of those moments where it's possible to contemplate. But if it's not to be, then it's not to be.
All right. And this is one of the things you've said many times. If you're going to make a change, make a big one. Make it worthwhile.
If you're going to go where you've never gone, you have to do what you have never done.
It sounds like Star Trek, to be honest with you. Okay, so question out here from Matthew. Oh, sorry, Pat, you wanted to ask something there? I saw a hand up there.
Yeah, sorry. Just before we move on to another question, my question then for you is, because in theory, I very much like your idea. But in practice, I feel that, especially given the generations of the nanny state,
Yep.
not enough Canadians, even not enough Albertans, are able to make that leap right away. It's kind of like jumping off the cliff. And my question is, would there be a potential where we could start off with something in the middle, like Dennis, and then have a kind of timeout phase of 5 or 10 years where we get the people to get used to the idea, but also to start taking the responsibility needed in order to actually put this theory in practice?
You've reminded me of an old.
Yeah,
It's a great question. It reminded me of an old saying. It goes like this: in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, of course, there is. I think the answer to your question, a very good question, is no. That's not going to happen. I don't think this is the kind of thing that can be done incrementally for the reasons that you allude to. It's very difficult to do at all. It's the kind of thing that has to be done cold turkey in a moment where everything is on its edge. So, for example, the Americans did something extraordinary. And their constitution is not the one that I'm describing, but they did for their time something as different as what I'm describing for this moment. And they needed that crisis for it to happen. If they had waited and they said, we're going to just reproduce what we have from Britain, we're just going to keep the Westminster system, we're going to keep everything except maybe not pledge to the king, and we'll fix it later on. Do we think that, 50 years after that, they would have sat down and said, folks, it's time now to change over to a completely different thing? Well, no, because by then the interests in America will have gathered under the system you established, and it would be impossible. So this is only possible to contemplate because you're making a break with what you have. And if you don't do it now, it won't happen.
Another way to look at this one, Pat, is can you move out of your parents' house but go back for dinner and laundry? Or can you be married and single at the same time? A little difficult. Sometimes you just have to make that leap of faith and get her done.
I'm thinking that we build it into the new system. Like, okay, you got 5 years to get used to this, and then the Band-Aid comes off.
Well, you could do it that way. You could do it that way. You could decide on the new system and say, fine, we're going to have this system that looks like this, but we're going to have, a 5 years, 10 years long transition period from one to the other. That might work because then you know where you're going to. Fine.
Yeah, but it can't be incremental with like growth. You have to establish it at the beginning, I think is his big point there.
Yes.
Matthew, here's one for you now. Question for Matthew. Thank you, Alberta Nan, for independence. Why is the constitutional monarchy model best suited for long-term unity in a newly formed independent Alberta when it has failed in Canada?
It hasn't failed. Canada has failed. And that's not because of the system. If we had a republic, we'd be in the same situation. The problem is that we have at least 4 different cultures and nations trying to unite across a vast continent under one system. No matter what the system is, it's just too big. So it's not the issue of, the king somehow having affected our lives. No, he hasn't really. It isn't even that the legislature is so bad. We voted, the majority in the East voted in the people who have made all these changes. It's because we are not able to have our voice heard. And even if we had a Republican model, we still would have had our voice not heard. So we fix it by cutting off Ottawa, not by making dramatic changes to the very foundation of all that we have. It's so simple. Get rid of the thing that's causing the problem and don't get rid of anything else. Then if there's further problems, you go, okay, we need to change here, we need to change there. That's actually the Westminster tradition, is you do have the living tree and an adjustment that can be made as you need to. But start slow, cut off the gangrene, and then see if you have to cut off the whole leg.
And then, thank you. And then back to Pat a little bit there. So I guess you can be single and married. It's called engagement. So you know when the wedding date is. So under that model, you're eventually going to get that marriage and get her done. Let's go to Dennis. There's one here for Dennis. So Dennis, what about globalists that prepare one person after another, even with your term limits? So interference in the process.
I mean, I'll be real clear. There is limited ways a constitution can block every last possible ill. And I don't care which one of the three you look at.
Here.
What we require more than anything is an informed, knowledgeable electorate who are keeping their eyes open.
Here.
One of the things I lament frequently is that the average Albertan doesn't even know how they're governed today. They don't know what the rules are. They don't know what the Constitution is. They don't know anything. And if we continue down that vein, then nefarious people like the globalists will come in and say, we'll just fool around with your system. We'll stack in our candidates one after the other, and you're actually no better off than you are today. So if citizens don't take that responsibility seriously, none of these systems will work.
Oh, I think mine will. Mine will because there's no power to wield, or very little power to wield. The globalists are not going to want to infiltrate my government because the governments don't do anything. I mean, there's no point. You can't lobby somebody who has no power. And there's no, being a member of the legislature in my kind of country is kind of like, why would you want to do that? You're kind of wasting your time. So,
and it will also force the public to very quickly become responsible and knowledgeable.
Yes, correct. Exactly so.
And Matt, you want to throw your hat in on this one? Because you actually have a head of state. And is it also going to be hereditary? Is the next king or queen going to come from the offspring of the current one?
Yeah, I'd just like to say elections are not always the answer. It's good to have heredity because then there's no reason to politic, right? Hey, let's try and get our candidate for the king. Well, it's whoever is the son of that person is going to be the king. So what are you going to do? You can't manipulate it. Elections provide for an industry and interests to build their own strategies to win elections. I was just sitting in a campaign thing where I was learning how, quite frankly, to manipulate voters, because someone was teaching, they said it more nicely than that, but you're teaching people how to use the system to maximize your vote and minimize the other guy's vote. So elections don't guarantee protection. That is the people, the populace, just what Dennis said. We need people who are going to think, Bruce said it, we all agree on this point, who are willing to act and who are willing to be involved in their government.
Okay. Next question for all, back to Prairie. Cossack. All countries that adopt universal voting rights are plagued by vote buying, uninformed voting, and voting on a short-term appetite. Prove me wrong. Bruce, you want to try and tackle that one first?
Oh, I wouldn't want to prove you wrong. I think that's true. But the point of my architecture is that it doesn't really matter that much. Because the legislature you elect is not going to be doing any fundamental things. The fundamental things are already set out in the Constitution, as are the limits to the power of the legislature itself. And it's going to attract people. So one of the things that Dennis and I have in common in these models is term limits for everybody. But my term limit goes like this. Everybody who has any role in the state in any capacity, whether it's a legislator, like a politician, a bureaucrat, a judge, an ambassador, a receptionist, a consultant can only work for the state for, pick a number, 6 to 8 years total over their lifetime. So if you are a politician for 8 years, you can thereafter not be a judge, not be an ambassador, not be a consultant. Moreover, those people who work for the state, all of them will be paid the median national wage. The median national wage. In other words, working for the state in any capacity is no way to get power, and it is no way to get rich. So you're going to have trouble finding people to do it. And who cares about the election? You're going to have people sitting in the chamber with nothing to do.
Okay, and then let's go to Dennis next on this one. How would you address this? If at
Well,
all?
I mean, I don't think it can be proven wrong. I think Bruce has some of the insight required in the sense that, we have to teach our electorate. We have to make it not desirable to be in government a long time. There's no big money to be made. I mean, where he and I differ is not on term limits as a concept, but I just say, look, you do need professionals who can deal with complex things. I come from largely an IT body of work. You cannot bring a guy in at the lowest bidder. Some guy's going to make $500 an hour doing something. He's not going to come do the government. A competent person won't come in do it for 50. So we have to find a way to somehow differentiate between the folks that actually wield power, so the elected officials, the top level bureaucrats, away from the people that are doing the day-to-day work that need to be paid a competitive wage because you need that skill set and that talent. So that's the way I see it.
Okay, then Matt, I'll throw this question to you as well, because there is no term limits. You can have lifelong appointments. What do you say?
I think it is important that everybody not be elected. That's why there should actually be appointments that are serious. One of the problems that we had with Pierre Trudeau and his ilk is they deliberately appointed less than bright people because they wanted to destroy the Senate and the Crown as legitimate. And so they appoint, whatever kind of dingbat they can find who can't actually do the job and who's going to embarrass the office. So appoint good people to those things that can then ensure that they hold the elected side to account so that the vote buying, uninformed voting, and voting on a short-term appetite can't take over the system.
Okay. Question. We got 2 more questions for all, and then we'll start to wrap up. So Frank asks, what is the size of government? Still 87 MLAs? Let's go ahead and start with Dennis on this one.
Don't have a specific number in mind. I think it's 87 feels pretty big for me. I tend to think of something like 40 senators, 40 MLAs or MPs, whatever you call them, because I'd like to see the size of government being small. I don't think many things are improved by having many voices in the room arguing their points.
Okay, and then Matt, we'll go to you next, and then Bruce at the end here.
I think representation by population means you have to have a fair number, because otherwise, if you have one person representing 150,000 people, it's just stupid. You can't do that. So you have to have a large enough house that when we say representative, they truly are representative. And on the Senate side, I actually just in my little personal BNA set it at 50 members that were divided among the counties and the cities of Alberta, just as a way to have enough people that, again, they represent their part geographically of the province. But again, it's not set in stone on that. You'd have to think it through more carefully than I did.
Okay, and Bruce, how would you split it up?
Yeah, I prefer something smaller, but I would imagine 2 chambers, one elected by population and the other elected by geographical territory, so that you counterbalance the distorting effects of concentration of the population. Other than that, 87 might be too many for one chamber, but I don't know what the exact number should be.
Okay, and you kind of you have this power, Bruce, like what's coming up. So I'm going to still bring it up. And Dave asked, how do you make sure the urban centers don't use their tyranny of their majority to impose their will on rural areas? We'll start with you, Bruce, because you kind of just answered that, and then we'll get to Matt, then Dennis.
Yeah. You have 2 chambers, and if you have one of those chambers elected by geographical territory, that is, 1 or 2 senators, let's call them, to be elected to the Senate based upon square footage in the territory, and the same size of each territory, then you completely offset any distorting effects of population.
Okay, and I just noticed that we're losing Matthew shortly, so let me just kind of get to the last one, and then we'll start to wrap up with you, Matthew. Let me go ahead and get this one off. Okay, so I just had it. Let me just go get it. Question for all. If there's a party system, do we abolish whipped votes for representatives to truly speak for the constituents? So the party really controlling the representatives. Let's start with Matt on this one.
I think there is a limited role for whipped votes. I like actually the UK's parliament in this, where the backbenchers have a lot more autonomy and independence than they do in Canada, where every vote feels like a whipped vote and they're all just kind of trained seals, if you say it in a mean way. So I would want fewer whipped votes, but I wouldn't want to abolish them, because if a government's trying to get its agenda through, it can't have some rogue MP stopping them.
Okay, Matt, if you have to run, we won't take that as you bowing out of this conversation. We know that you have a schedule. So we'll move to Dennis's on this one. Party lines, they seem to be pretty solid lately.
Yeah, I don't like whipped votes at all. I think that there's going to be some natural congregation of people to say, hey, let's all vote this way or that way, but I don't see it a lot across party lines. You take the case-by-case basis of a group of people who like an idea or want to pursue an idea. Will they whip themselves to do it for that particular piece of legislation? Fine. But I don't see a party saying, okay, Dennis, you must vote for this because otherwise bad things happen. Don't like it.
Okay, and Bruce, if you can answer this one quickly, we might be able to get to Matt's closing. So, because we'll go to that next. What are your thoughts?
Sure, I'm not a great fan of whipped votes, but the whipped votes happen more frequently in Westminster systems because there's more likely to be a vote that might take down the government. So if you don't want to lose power, you have to whip your votes. So that doesn't occur in different kinds of systems where there isn't the same liability in losing control of the agenda.
Okay, great job. So Matt, we're going to go to you first, so you can do your closing comments, and then if you have to take off, you take off.
Yeah, I would say first, both Bruce and Dennis are awesome and friends, which I appreciate. And they think deeply, and they show us what can be done when we all think, when we all weigh these questions out, not as a debate to score points, but as helping people to be educated and to understand. So I'd say we have capable people. We have smart people. We have knowledgeable people. Let's get informed and think. And then on the other side of independence, it's not a scary unknown, but it's a practical thing that we can look forward and see a way to the future. Let's look and see how we can make a better province and a better country out of independence through all of these things.
Hear, hear. So I'm the king of this podcast, so I'm going to prorogue you now, Matt. So if you need to leave, you can leave. But thank you very much for being here. Appreciate you.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Matt.
Dennis, kind of closing comments. What do you have for us?
I echo a lot of what Matt says. I consider both Bruce and Matt friends, people whose opinions I treasure and value. And what really matters to me is that all three perspectives actually share a very important and common concern. And we all understand that freedom isn't preserved just by good intentions. It only survives where durable institutions make abuses of power difficult, visible, and reversible, even if they're small the way Bruce sees it. And the disagreement amongst us is not whether power is dangerous. We all agree it is. The disagreement is how best to restrain it. And that's my view.
And Bruce, closing comments, and then we'll kind of start to wrap up. But yeah, take your time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I completely agree as well. And one of the fantastic things about this moment in Alberta is that I can talk to people like Dennis and Matthew about these things in a serious way, in a way that is, has potential real world implications, as opposed to sitting in some dry academic chamber and talking about it theoretically. So my hat's off to both of them for engaging in this and putting forward their ideas. It's been a treat to get to know both of them and a treat to be on this podcast. So thank you very much.
Certainly all of our pleasure. We enjoyed it. And you certainly got a lot of people thanking Bruce about yours, because there's nothing to look at and say, hey, look, they did great. But I really like your comment there. Like it's so good they don't want it, so we don't see it anywhere around. That's kind of an interesting argument there. One of my favorite ice creams growing up, and sorry if I say this wrong, but Napoleon, or the strawberry, chocolate, and vanilla, because I like a little bit of all of them. So Kathy, I'm actually going to come to you next. Do you see pieces of all of these that you actually like, and maybe there's a way to kind of create something very different here?
The one that I really have trouble with is with maths, with the Westminster system. It hasn't worked. Everybody knows when I'm going around doing my speeches, it's to bring that education piece as to how we became a province. And I have never ever seen it work to our advantage. So even in a smaller setting in the country of Alberta, I just can't see how there's not going to be one part of the country of Alberta that's left out because of the way that it's set up in the Westminster system. But I'm willing to be proven wrong. I really like what Bruce says. I'm libertarian too, so get out of my way, let me live my life, and let's go on. And if you do me wrong, we'll do something about it. But at the same time, Dennis says, he comes in as that measured voice, bringing kind of the two sides together that is probably much more palpable for Albertans to be able to wrap their heads around. So again, this is why we just have to keep having these conversations so that Albertans go to that referendum very educated as to what they're saying yes or no to, and then more importantly to the Constitutional Convention that will follow, knowing exactly what's before them and what they're saying yes or no to. So I just really appreciate this conversation, and I look forward to doing it again.
Fantastic. Angela, same question. Do you think there's a piece of each one of them that you like, or are you just a chocolate vanilla type of gal and forget that strawberry from the Crown?
Yeah, I do. I honestly do have a hard time understanding the importance of the Crown or what value it would bring to us. And again, like Kathy, I am libertarian leaning for sure. I like what Bruce has to say, and I think it's going to take a lot of education to get Albertans to be able to envision that and to understand that what he is pointing out, and so if we don't get to that point, then that kind of leaves us with Dennis's, which would not necessarily be a bad thing at all. I can see a lot of good in it. I really do believe that the cure to what ails us is to have a very active and informed electorate, which is why we're having these discussions and these conversations, and why we're inviting folks. Like, if you haven't had a chance to go and look at the 6 previous episodes, please do. You'll find a list of them on our Facebook and on our X pages, because we definitely need folks who are informed and able to feel confident when they stand in that polling booth and check that box.
Yeah, I don't want to freak anybody out, but it may be one of the most important non-family and personal related question you ever answer. So make sure you're informed on it. Pat, same question. Can we take pieces of each of that, or are you going to throw out one altogether too?
I think we're going to have to, and I think it's no surprise to anybody that in terms of a Westminster system, it's just a non-starter. And I actually disagree with a couple of things Matthew said. The UK is a small country, smaller than the landmass of Alberta, and how well is that going there? And the Crown is not of no consequence, because through the Governor General, the Crown controls the military and the government. And so I don't agree with that whatsoever. I'll be honest, I'm a Bruce Pardy gal. However, I don't think that our population as a whole is prepared for that. I don't think they'll go for it. And in that sense, that's why I asked my question, which is, can we start with the middle and put term limits on that and decide in 5 or 10 years, you need to get on your feet, get used to the idea of not having a nanny state, do everything for you, and have a plan for incrementally. My background's in behavioral science, so we need to incrementally, properly, positively reinforce people to get them on board. So that's kind of my idea. And in terms of the common thread, where we need an educated and engaged citizenry, rather than either precluding people from voting or mandating that everyone should vote, maybe there should be a test that you need to pass before you vote, which will be educational and, you know, get you up to speed before you're making such decisions for your fellow citizens and yourself.
Should the
Thank you,
first
Pat.
question be, can you name your representative now?
Okay, so we got about 30 seconds and we're going to lose the stream. So I'm going to have to wrap up on that point. And I actually think there's a lot more support than you would think for that kind of thinking, Pat. So thank you very much to Matt for being here as well. It's a tough position to take. You're fighting an uphill battle because there's a lot of resentment and jadedness because we're currently in that system. Dennis, thank you so much for sharing yours as well. I think a lot of people understand it. They get it. And then Bruce, I think we have to keep talking about yours some more because if there's a lot of support for it, you might be able to see that radical shift to make this all worthwhile. Kathy, Pat, Angela, you all rock, but thank you all very much for being here tonight. I appreciate it. Make sure you share it out. There's multiple places you can find us, so share it out, follow everybody involved. And I definitely want to make sure that you guys all understand that I love you all very much, and God bless.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
Amen.